Here's a list of things that made this animation possible for Dungeons and Daddy's Clone Tree Hill. First thing is navigation. So in order to manage a scene this large, I needed to be able to pop around as quickly as possible. So I enabled an option in the view menu. I hit N in order to bring up the view menu. The view lock to 3D cursor. So it will center around wherever I click on the scene and move my 3D cursor around. So for example, I'm over here working on maybe the door, and I can rotate around the door based off of that 3D cursor location. If I needed to actually work on the scene, the area with Ron, I can click on Ron, scroll in, and I can rotate around Ron and move him around however I want. The other thing is if you hold down on the middle mouse button and then hold control and then hold down on the middle mouse button, you can zoom out and you can zoom in by pulling in and out pretty easily. So you can get really, really close. That's too close. On this side of the screen, I have what I usually like to have as my camera view. So if you are within this window and you hit number pad 0, it will automatically go to your camera. You need to be careful if you try to rotate at all, it'll just snap back out. So hit 0 again. Over here you can kind of see my, this is my shoulder camera. This is my zoom shoulder camera. So whenever I needed the scene to show a close-up of the cricket, I think, there we go. So this camera, there, and then I zoom out to the next camera. You can see it has activated. If you were wondering how I was doing the camera switching, in my timeline, it's actually these, you can see these markers, the scene pan down, the next pan down, shoulder zoom. Here, let me zoom in there a little bit so you can see a little better. Yeah, over shoulder, shoulder zoom, door, shoulder zoom. This is the door, another shoulder zoom. The rest of it's just shoulder and shoulder zoom. To get that, you want to activate that camera. So I'm going to go here, and maybe I want to have the, go back to the pan down camera. I can go to the pan down camera in my scene collection. So I have it under cameras, scene pan down 01. And if you have that camera selected, you can go to view, cameras, and then set active object as camera. So that will set it as the camera. I think, yeah, it needs to be the active camera. So even though you have it selected, it doesn't make it the active camera. Setting it in that object menu will do that. I think also Control-Shift-0 will do it. So if I do Control, maybe it's just Control-0. Yeah, it's just Control-0. Control number pad 0. We'll set it as the active camera. Switch cameras. And if you want to make it switch the camera in the timeline, when you are in that active camera, if you go down to the timeline, you need to be inside of the timeline area, or one of these timelines, and hit Control B, and that will make it so that it will switch to that scene pan down camera, or whatever the active camera is. So now you can see, if I just go ahead and play,
look a lot like him, like
it switches over. So if you'll notice, there are a lot of duplicated objects. These objects are inside of my library folder, and my library folder is just in the same directory as my my scenes. And this is where I store Ron. I was experimenting with some grass, the cricket, and some of the scene objects. So if I click, if I go into the scene objects, you can see this just holds the tents. And in here I can edit the tents. So for example, maybe I can do something silly like put the stairs up here. And if I save it, go back to my scene, go to, and if you just close this and open it back up again, it would update all of these references to have the stairs up on the top. But since closing it and opening it just is kind of a hassle, I like to go to this drop down menu, go to Blender File, and down here you can see my linked objects. So the cricket, the grass, Ron, and the scene objects. You can right click and reload on that scene object, and all of those references are updated. So you have silly staircases on top. There were some items that I was kind of lazy and just made in the scene itself. So for example, the door, click there. If you want to, so it's kind of a hassle to work on an object when you have all of this stuff in the way. Even when you tab in to actually get into edit mode, it's hard to like work on it if you got all this shit in the way, right? So I discovered this cool thing where if you hit numpad / boop, you can go into isolation mode. You can do your editing here, free of any obstacles, and then you can hit the / to go back, and all those things carry over. The other thing, so these trees are not my finest work, but I think they convey what they need to convey. So I'm not too angry about it. Well, I have a lot of other things going on right now, so it's probably a little angry at me. There you go. You can do it. Good job. There you go. These are actually instances. So there's this cool thing where if you click on something, hit Alt-D, it will create a linked instance of that object that you just copied. So for example, if I tab into this, you can see that this object will also, zoom a bit, this object will also be changed over here, the linked one, because this is just an instance of this object. If I tab out, and that change is saved. So the trees are basically the same thing, and in the story, all of these trees are actually supposed to be the exact same tree, because this place is actually very unnatural, even though it's supposed to be a natural hippie commune kind of place. There are things that are very wrong with it, like they took a tree that was what was considered the most beautiful tree, and then they copied it over and over and over again instead of having like variants in their environment. I did initially want to use freestyle, and when I was just working on Ron the model, I got the most perfect freestyle lines. It had a bunch of life to it because it was like squiggly and had varying thickness using curves. But when I brought that freestyle into the scene, it just was awful. And even after a lot of tweaking, it took a minute and a half extra per frame in order to render. And I knew if I was going to have, around like 1850 frames, I was not going to get this project out when I wanted to get it out. And it did take me several re-renders of several scenes in order to get what I needed out of this project. So I'm really glad I made that decision and just disabled freestyle. I did have it so that the freestyle would only be on the characters and not in the background. But that also was just way too much work for the benefit. So I ended up using a method. Actually, I can show you on the Ron model. Ron has no eyes. I'm sorry. That's because I drew his eyes in freestyle. But he has a solidify modifier on with the thickness like slightly out. There we go. Whoop. And the normals are flipped. So you're basically shading the inside of something. And the material, it was really important that you... Oh wait, that's the skin. Because like, what? It's not there. You want to do backface culling. And because otherwise that happens. And I think the rest of this is just fine. If you're doing toon shading, you really want to have most everything on emission. Or at the very end, be on emission. Most of the other shaders were a diffuse to shader, to a shader to RGB, and then a color ramp. Yep. So that you can kind of have that toon look, but have a little bit more control of where the shadows are. And shader to RGB, that's a newer addition, so I really like that. So this is definitely the most difficult part of creating this scene, was learning how to use the NLA editor. Holy cow, this thing, when you're not used to it, honestly, it was very nerve-wracking because I would make a little change over here, and it would completely destroy my work over here in later scenes. I think what really made me understand it better was using a tutorial from CG Textures. I watched a few tutorials on YouTube and it just did not click. The way I used it was that I think Ron is the best best way to explain. So I had, say, so these are tracks, and the bottom track is the base. Everything builds up on top of that base. You have, and this one definitely, those are just eyebrow movements. This next one is just a hodgepodge. And this one, yeah, I just, where I needed to, I built it up, and then I realized, oh, you're supposed to build up in, say, like, this part would be like the facial movements, the bottom part would be the body movements or location, like rig location and stuff. And then you build up into the finer, minute details, like the eyebrows. So I'm going to uncheck these two tracks, and we'll only have this bass track. Sorry, it's really goofy. So you notice his eyebrows are not moving.
No, yeah, they all look like you. That one and that one.
Henry shakes his head and he says, and then he kind of tries to mime out again, like
now
he
you
pretends
see
to
he's
hide
not moving
behind Ron, and then like
he's locked
sneaks
into
across to the other shoulder
animation.
and then nods like, you get it?
Oh yeah,
it's carrying over. So if I add that back in, you can see he's actually moving now. It's building off of this track. And this, so his eyebrows are moving here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I still have it. That's why it's not working.
Oh, that one. That one.
Oh yeah, see how his eyebrows moved right there? So if I uncheck that, they no longer move.
That one.
And I think one of the things that really helped out in this process was making sure this track works how you want. And when you build on top of that track, don't try to overwrite some of those animations that you did before. So if you want to, let me get into his model. In the NLA editor, say I wanted to change the eyebrows, you can tab into it. And I have just the eyebrows showing up because I put it on a layer. So like the body bones are on this layer, the phenomes or phenomes, so whatever, are on that layer, and then I have the eyebrows just on that layer. And I could manipulate them, set keyframes. And it was important for the NLA editor that I didn't put extra things I didn't need. So sometimes if I'm lazy, I'll just do location, rotation, and scale. But I was trying to be good and just hit like location or rotation. Usually I don't. It's rare that I would do location and rotation.
And that one. That one.
So it's added it to that action. And
You that one and that one.
And now you can see that reflected up here. So that location will overwrite this location if I changed it here, and it'll overwrite that location if I changed it here too. So just be careful on that, because it got into some weirdness. As for the grease pencil, it's actually by camera angle. So I would only draw the grease pencil in here when I did it by cursor. So wherever the cursor is, it puts a layer, I would say like a plane based off of that cursor with the view angle of my camera. So let's get out of pose mode. Let's go to the grease pencil object. And here we go. No, that's edit mode. Sorry. You want to go to draw mode. And see, it's by 3D cursor. You can use whatever you like here. There's better tutorials and more depth for that in other places. But I just want to say for my instance, I use 3D cursor and view to get it so that whatever the camera view is where those lines were drawn. So if I'm going to back out of this, or actually, would you draw something? That's the eraser. La, 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 la. You can see it's by this camera view is where that's being drawn. And by cursor, you see where my cursor is right here. And boom, that's where it was drawn. So I just decided to use that. I initially was going to put the eyes here, but it just didn't quite match up with the look that I wanted. Like if his eyes were all of a sudden like right here, it looked weird. I don't know, maybe kind of was a bad decision to do the drawing because I had to make some adjustments to his face, like the angle, and because he had some twisty neck problems, and I had to individually fix each frame of the animation because you can see I got
No, yeah, they all look like.
Look at the grease pencil. You can see there's quite a bit of frames here. And
Like you, that one, and that.
so yeah, it was kind of a hassle to change. I got away with some just uh, moving the whole grease pencil object. But I don't know. I might want to actually model his eyes next time. Or if I need to draw Henry for a later scene, or not draw, but if I need to model Henry for a later scene, model his eyes as well. I think that's it. Those were the big things that I wanted to make sure that other people knew when if they were going to tackle a huge undertaking like this. Even though it was, gosh, only a minute long, it did take a lot of time. And I learned a whole bunch of new things, so it was definitely worth it. Okay, thanks.